Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evie Evans, and welcome to Chatham Community Library's special observance of Women's History Month. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, a woman's perspective of Chatham County. We'd like to thank a few people. First, of course, is our distinguished group of panelists, Ilana Dubester, Executive Director of El Vinculo, Hispano, Commissioners Diana Hales and Karen Howard from Chatham County Board of Commissioners, the former mayor of Pittsboro, Cindy Perry, and we hope Michelle Wright, Equity and Community Engagement Lead of Chatham County Department of Public Health. We, of course, also want to thank our moderator for the afternoon, Dr. Vaughn Upshaw of the University of North Carolina's Gillings School of Public Health. Dr. Upshaw is also the principal investigator for the North Carolina Public Health Leadership Institute. And finally, we absolutely must thank the branch manager of Chatham County Community Library, Rita Van Dynen, who is our technical expert this afternoon. And she's seeing to it that this roundtable goes off without a hitch, despite the weather coming in. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to present our panelists and Dr. Vaughn Upshaw.
Thank you so much, Evie and Rita and Chatham County Community Library for hosting this event and giving us a chance to celebrate the work that women have done in Chatham County. I've lived in Chatham now for over 30 years, and in my time here, I've seen women at the forefront of the changes that have really made a difference and made the kind of place that many of us want to call home. It is about those women historically, about the issues that we face today, and about the opportunities to continue making Chatham a place that everyone wants to be a part of that we're going to talk about today. There's been an opportunity given to us by some work that a team of students at the University of North Carolina's public policy program did a few years ago, where they created a report describing the status of women in Chatham County. And Evie pulled from that data information about the lives of Chatham women. And we are going to use that as a framework to raise some issues. But before we get started on that, I want to make sure that you all also have an opportunity to participate in the conversation. And I invite you to use the chat box and put in a name, a short anecdote, something that you have had experience with where women have made a difference, or you've seen the lives of women improved in a meaningful way as someone who has been a part of the Chatham County community. As we go through, we may have an opportunity to speak to some of your people that you name or examples that you call forward, as they may connect to some of the stories our panelists are going to tell and some of the experiences they've had as well. So we want to be sure that you are helping us think about what makes Chatham, and particularly right now, women in Chatham, a big part of what makes this a special place. So I'm going to start with talking about what we all know is happening, which is we are growing. We are growing rapidly. The county has seen a over 20% growth since 2010 over the last decade. And that, for those of us who've been here for more than a decade, that growth is very palpable to us. It's had an impact on all sorts of things. And so we'll start by asking Commissioner Diana Hales to help us think about what that change has meant for our housing in Chatham County. What's going on out there, Diana? I'll turn it over to you. You'll need to unmute, Diana.
Thank you. I was trying to do so well with my mute button. If those of you who ever attend a Board of Commissioners meeting or a planning board meeting are pretty much aware that we have a constant group of developers putting housing plans together across the county, primarily in the east. And what you're also probably aware of, if you go around Lake Jordan, is that is absolutely one of the primary spots for huge amount of residential growth. And in fact, what some people may not be aware of is that Cary's town border actually flows right into Chatham, almost up to Jordan Lake. And that was done by an agreement back in 2010 to allow developers to ask for annexation into Cary so they could have Cary's municipal services, sewer and water, although Chatham County is actually providing some of that water too. But the growth of housing is the population we're talking about, a 20% growth. That's just the beginning. We know that the growth in new people moving in here is absolutely going to increase, and it's increasing at a very rapid rate. Just Chatham Park alone will account for 20,000 residences, homes, when it's built out. Of course, that build out could take 20 or 30 years. And we also know that a lot of the housing is unaffordable to long-term residents in Chatham County, or people that are on the lower part of the economic spectrum. And that is, in fact, the biggest issue in housing facing not just Chatham County, it's facing surrounding counties as well. And part of the challenge is we already know we have a need, a deficit of 3,000 units for affordable housing. We already have that deficit. And part of our challenge is to provide methodology and a means and a mechanism, and if incentives are what it takes, but to have that housing available, to build it for Chatham County. Because it's not just, and we have a task force, and the towns also participate in the task force on affordable housing, because it's a county issue, it's a town issue. And we want our affordable housing mix to really work with the towns because of existing sewer and water infrastructure. And so the need is everywhere, and part of the affordable housing mix is going to have to be multifamily. And we have several projects that we have worked on. One just opened in Siler City at the former site of the Henry Siler School. The school is no longer needed by government or the school system, and that has been repurposed. It is now affordable housing, and the lot was so large that we could add new construction, additional units, and that is for low-income housing. And it's absolutely lovely.
That is really wonderful to hear, and I really appreciate the fact that you've given us a sense of what's happening on the east and taken us to the west. I know that Ilana lives in western part of the county, and maybe another part of what's happening in housing is something that she can talk about in the western part.
Yes, thank you. And just want to say what a pleasure it is to be with all of you in this panel. I'm very honored. And hello to all the participants with us today. Hope to hear from you later. Yeah, I think part of what I wanted to add, and that also this report highlighted, are the differences between East and West in terms of prosperity, right? And in terms of housing, what we see happening in Western Chatham is that lower rates of home ownership and higher rates of rentals, of course. But the issue, serious issue of dilapidated housing that is severely impacting the health of our community as well, and as well as, you know, property prices, you name it, and lack of code enforcement for these dilapidated houses. They are rentals, really, right? Tied together to issue of homelessness and overcrowding, because many of these homes are occupied by multi-families because of the lack of affordable housing in Siler City. Some of the new developments that have come in recent years have been helpful, except that they exclude a portion of the population if they are government subsidized. You know, as an immigrant, I'm originally from Brazil. I moved here about 30 years ago. And somebody who works with the immigrant community, we certainly know that there are a lot of undocumented immigrants who live among us who don't have access to the housing vouchers or any Section 8 type housing, and who tend to be the ones who then are relegated to mobile home parks and the dilapidated housing that are around town. So I think one of the things that I just want to give a shout out to is Chatham Habitat for their leadership in affordable housing across the county, but particularly Siler City. I think they've done a fabulous job increasing home ownership and getting all kinds of families into homes, and more support and more power to them as they continue to do that. But I also see an opportunity as a county for us to really demand of developers, incentivize and demand of developers a set aside for affordable housing within their developments. Orange County has done this, other counties have done this, and this is something that we can codify and improve our housing stock.
Thank you very much, Ilana. In fact, I'm going to ask you to pick up on one of the things that you said, and this discussion on housing, and transition us into another topic, which is COVID. And you talked about overcrowding. And one of the things that really has a major impact on the spread of an infectious disease is the inability to have space. Maybe you could say a little bit about that, and we'll transition to a new topic.
Great. Yeah, that certainly has been a hardship for families in multi-generational households. That it's just there's not enough space for isolating, and there wasn't any other support system for moving somebody out of their home into a hotel or something, which is a really difficult thing to do anyway, even if there were the funds available. But honestly, I think the biggest culprits of COVID in our community really are the industries. And you know, to name the major one, Mountaire. And so, but I think some industries have done a good job of protecting their workers. And for example, Acme McCrary has done a good job. Mountaire has done a lousy job for the most part, especially in the beginning of the outbreak, for a couple of months where there was complete inaction after knowing that there was COVID among the plants, which led to then a huge outbreak in our community, right? And so I think that when we talk about COVID and learning the lessons from this crisis, that, you know, we have learned a lot and will continue to learn a lot, is for us to really address inequities head on and very early, right? But what I mean by that is, like, it took a while to push through those systems of testing to become accessible to folks who were not internet savvy, right? So to create those phone lines for people to call for get testing, to create the sites for testing. There was not much cooperation from a plant like Mountaire for setting up testing at their facility. So, and so when we think about a health crisis of this magnitude, which hopefully is the last one in our lifetime, but honestly is unlikely, that we really need to think about true protection of essential workers in terms of OSHA regulations and not just guidelines, and authority to intervene and sanction employers who are not following it. You know, as early on, I talked to Karen about this before the outbreak on Mount Air, that we had a ticking time bomb in our hands, and that bomb exploded. And so Siler City COVID rate has been huge, and the immigrant community has been incredibly impacted, not just the immigrant community for sure. So, and also I think that a transparency of information about these types of outbreaks, to this day, we can't find out how many people are infected at each plant. So we don't know if what they're doing is good enough. And not because the data isn't available, but the data is not being allowed to be shared with the public. And so, yeah, so these are some of the things, but I also want to say generally in terms of access to healthcare, that is high time for us to expand Medicaid. It's not, I know it doesn't help everybody, but it certainly is going to help a lot of people and women in our community to have Medicaid extension.
Thank you, Ilana. And I think that this is a really important topic. And I see that Karen Howard has asked to weigh in here. I also want to put a pitch in as we are transitioning and talking a bit about healthcare, that I know that there are efforts through the Chatham Health Alliance to do more on-site registration of people, having folks out in community settings where they can register folks for COVID vaccines who may not have internet access, and that there are some efforts to try to make those hubs available. But I am absolutely hearing what you're saying, and I think Medicaid expansion is a huge issue. So I'm going to take that and pass it over to Karen Howard.
Thank you. I wanted to just jump in and say, just bring this back around to women, because we know that COVID has had a disproportionate impact on women. So women whose jobs were less likely to transition to remote. Women were often saddled with the additional responsibility of childcare and quote unquote homeschooling, because that's in a lot of cases what it ended up becoming. And were also largely responsible for caring for anyone else in the household that was ill. So all of those things sort of scaffolded on top of the challenges in a place like Mount Air. It just became, for a community, an entire community, untenable. And I think that there were places where we could have done things faster. And they didn't happen, even at the government level. And there are some painful lessons learned about how we will need to interact with industry and with our corporate and business partners to ensure better outcomes for residents. Leaving any of it to them to manage entirely on their own is unfair to the residents. And that certainly isn't something that I think that we will take lightly in the future.
Thank you, Karen. And I think that you give us another, okay, Diana, I see you would like to weigh in on that for just a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, and as I actually had talked to our interim health director, well, I think he's now our official health director, Mike Zellick, because of what's in place for the next time, because COVID is just simply the SARS virus that's affecting us today. There's going to be others. And one of the key things, and he did mention about, looking at equity in pandemic response, and also building on partnerships, like it was absolutely critical, and through the emergency management operation and public health. And of course, everyone in public health wants to see expansion of Medicaid. I don't know what it's going to take for our legislators to understand that Medicaid really will have an enormous impact throughout the state for women, all minorities, and especially the working poor. And those are the people that are highly impacted. But I think, as you said, it's the partnerships, it's the Health Alliance. Chatham has a Health Alliance that's that's really ramping up, and it's going to be an effective asset, and especially with Hispanic Liaison Partnership and with others working, because Mount Air is the largest employer at this point in time in the Chatham County. So I just wanted to put in.
Thank you, Diana, because I do think that it is important that we recognize, and I see the note about Piedmont Health Services as well, and they have been working, again, another strong collaborator with the Chatham Health Alliance and the network in Chatham County. I just have to say, as I get ready to transition us a little bit here, that this has been one of the things that in my time in Chatham and having worked around the state, we are exceptionally good at collaborating in Chatham County. And we have done that across the board on so many issues. And again, a large credit for that goes to women in leadership. Another place where we've had good leadership, and tying back to what we've just been talking about, how women have been unfairly hit by COVID, they've also been unfairly hit in many cases because of domestic violence. And so I'm using my very bad analogy there to shift over to Cindy Perry and the experience that we've had in Chatham in trying to provide services to women who are at risk because their houses are maybe struggling with a variety of issues, including poverty, substance abuse, intergenerational violence, and many of the other challenges that fall, again, disproportionately on women and mothers as they try to protect themselves and their families. And so, Cindy, I'd like for you to speak a little bit about how we are doing in caring for some of the most vulnerable women in our community.
Thank you, Vaughn. And I appreciate too, as Ilana has said, the opportunity to join in with you today. Back in the 80s, we developed an agency here in Chatham County, which unfortunately did not survive, but it didn't mean that the crisis of domestic violence and sexual assault had been solved. It certainly hasn't been. And so about 3 years ago, Second Bloom, taking the name from the thrift store on Hillsborough Street, reformed to assist women and men in violence issues and support. And, I guess it was everybody's greatest hope that we wouldn't continue to need this kind of an agency in the county. The county had generously taken on a tremendous number of the responsibilities. And so Second Bloom actually partnered with the county and is in the process of now receiving from the county various tasks. We've developed the hotline, helpline, and reestablished that in the community. And bit by bit, the county is transitioning over to us at Second Bloom the ideas of an agency with vitality again to help in Chatham County. The idea, Second Bloom, initially, of course, started out with the thrift shop where clothing got a second life, but we attached it to the agency as a whole because in many respects, women and men who have gone through domestic violence and sexual assault can be given a new life, a second blooming, after dealing with those kinds of crises. So the agency, Second Bloom, is doing very well. We've now moved into our new location at the Food Line Shopping Center. The most, of course, 100% of the net proceeds of that thrift store go to help domestic violence and sexual assault victims here in Chatham County. And Tamsy Hill, one of our, who's our program director, is doing a wonderful job despite COVID. And believe me, the challenges of COVID in counseling domestic violence and sexual assault clientele is every bit as challenging as you could imagine. But Tamsy has organized the helpline and support groups. And every day we're stronger and better. And a lot of that comes from, quite frankly, this community is just so amazing. It's support of Second Bloom as far as donations, as far as support of our programming. It's just been an amazing process watching this community come together to help women. And it's not just women, as I've said. We now have a man on our board, and have good diversity on our board. And it's important to recognize that violence knows no economic situations or gender. It's all a terribly unfortunate aspect of our society these days. So I think that the continued support of this community is one of the things that just absolutely thrills me, whether you're talking about programming in the area of domestic violence, or looking at water quality issues, or looking at issues in the Hispanic community at Ilana. It's just, this community continues to be extremely supportive of its charitable organizations.
Cindy,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think I'm gonna take some of the threads that you've just given us and move us to the next topic, because I do want to make sure that we are. Yeah, oh, Ilana, yeah, you want to grab that one? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yes,
before I shift. Go ahead. Yeah, perfect.
No, thank you, Cindy, so much. I want to take this opportunity to recognize one of my mentors and teachers and great women leaders in our community, Jo Sanders, who led family violence and rape crisis for over 25 years and is also involved in Second Bloom. And we have a long way to go still from what the peak of family violence rate crisis with its shelter and 2 agencies in Pittsboro and Siler City and full bilingual services. We have a long way to go to get there, but I really appreciate that we're heading in that direction, because that is unfortunately an issue that's not going to go away. And so we need to do all we can to support services for domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims.
And
thank you so much. Yeah, Cindy, go ahead.
I'd just like to say that Second Bloom has just hired a Latinx advocate, and so we're very excited about adding that bilingual nature to our staffing, and so thank you.
This has been a real education, I think, for people who are on the call about the kinds of ways in which these different things come together. And it is, in fact, about education and something you were just saying, Cindy, about programming and how do you reach out over Zoom or via internet. And those are other things that have been issues for women in Chatham County. And I'm going to tip over to Karen Howard to talk a little bit about what the challenges are and the opportunities are for how do we begin to help people be connected, particularly in this virtual environment, and how does that connect to our education and workforce and all these other things that we keep dancing around here.
All right, well, thank you. And I will start with the difficult parts, the challenges. As a parent with kids in Chatham County schools, and in COVID having to do a lot of that virtually, you know, I've personally dealt with some of the challenges of staying connected, of access to the teachers. And I live in Northeastern Chatham, where my Wi-Fi and internet services are consistent, and I am not suffering from having internet access on my end. But many of my both sons' teachers have those problems. And so it's not just, us remembering to focus on the needs of our students. We have 2 components essential for school: teachers and students. And if the teachers themselves are also struggling with access to internet services, we're losing so much time. We're losing so much of their energy. So I absolutely understand the need to have fast, reliable broadband services. It's not a challenge unique to Chatham, however. It is a challenge that has been largely exacerbated by our General Assembly. It's not a question of money. Chatham County government has been willing and able for several years now to invest in some of the infrastructure that is required to ensure that our residents have reliable, affordable access to internet services. And our General Assembly we have legislation that prevents local governments from investing, which, I can understand if your concern is that local government may decide to go into the provision of broadband services, but that is as likely as local government going into the provision of water and electricity and every other service voluntarily. The only times local government will go into that is when private enterprise is not meeting the need, and we should be able to do it. We should be able to, build that last mile, add those additional antenna, whatever it takes to extend broadband to the farthest reaches of any county or any community. We have to treat this like a utility. And until that happens, we will continue to have pockets of Chatham and all counties in North Carolina that are suffering from lack of access. So we have done some things that I think are going to be beneficial. One of which is investing in advanced towers. Now we have these advanced towers that are going up around the county, and they were primarily for our emergency services. But they are going to also be able to co-host broadband internet services and ensure that there's connection between those towers. It won't fix it for everyone. And it certainly won't make broadband affordable for everyone, but it is beginning to chip away at some of the restrictions that were put in place for Chatham County. And when we go beyond the challenges of just actually getting access to internet services, we then can start thinking about what are the other challenges that women and families face because of, or in times of education, or in terms of jobs. Broadband internet access is critical for all of it. I've marveled at how quickly our young people have adjusted and have adapted to the COVID way of living. That even in the worst of times, I know that being at home or being in a classroom with 2 or 3 kids is not ideal, but our children have done a remarkable job, along with our teachers, of pivoting and ensuring that kids got access to as much content as they could get. It does not make it an ideal situation. As a parent with special needs son at home, I am constantly aware of the fact that he is better served in our public schools, where the professionals are, where they can access him on an almost daily basis. But as a community, I think we've done a really good job of thinking about investing in and supporting education and educational tools, which can help women. I myself did this. I started out, I wanted to be a lawyer. And I had the opportunity to pivot. I was a lawyer. It didn't fit with my lifestyle, and I was able to pivot. So how do we ensure that other people in our community, other members of our community, can pivot to another career, or into a career after they've stayed home, or into something if they haven't finished high school, if they haven't finished community college, if they haven't finished college? And I think it's those investments in public education, in our community college system, in our in scholarship and opportunity to extend their learning into relevant and interesting and rewarding fields. We talk about jobs, we talk about economic development, but we don't easily talk about meaningful employment. And I think that local government has the opportunity to invest in things that allow for meaningful employment for Chatham County residents. If you make a difference for the women in our community, you will make a difference for everybody. So even though we know we have these challenges ahead of us, I know that right now we have the political will. And because we do have women on the board, and we do have women who have had very different experiences, I think that we have some voices on there that are going to continue to be outspoken, proponents for things that will be good for women, good for families, and therefore good for our entire community.
I would love to see Chatham County lead the way in subsidizing broadband for low-income residents.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that now we are at a point where I think that COVID has demonstrated to us the pandemic has lifted out the worst and most challenging aspects of life in probably any community, but certainly in Chatham. And I think that that means that we now know where the deepest, darkest pits are that people get trapped in. And so we should be doing bold, brave things that make a difference for people. We often do bold, brave things that make a difference for industry, that make a difference for entrepreneurs, that make a difference for businesses. I believe that we need to pivot to doing bold, brave things that make a difference for individuals.
Karen, that is a really wonderful segue to where we wanted to kind of pull this panel kind of into focus before we open it up to a dialogue with our participants here, that the role of government is something that has been under assault for a few decades. And what you mentioned about broadband, I learned after the vote had been taken at the General Assembly, it took a donation of about $5,000 to get that piece of legislation passed in Raleigh. And that has really crippled economic development for many parts of our state where we are not economically profitable to industry to expand broadband, but for the prosperity of the community at large, access to those services are required. And it's about education, it is about employment, but it's also increasingly about our right to participate in a democratic society. It is also about our ability to know what's going on in our communities through local media, which we've lost. It's also about trying to ensure that everybody has access to not only the voting booth, but also to districts and people who are going to represent them in their interests, not just the interests of those who are able to make substantial financial donations to a person's candidacy. We are at a place where the opportunities for change are ripe, and I believe that women have a unique and powerful voice in this work. We have certainly seen that in the last efforts in Georgia, and I think that we can all look in our own backyards at people who have made that contribution and made that effort. I think about Valerie Fichy and Richard Reeves at the state, and I think about the people who are sitting here on this panel today, as well as others in Chatham County who have carved that path forward for us. And Diana, I wonder if you could bring us back to how did women in Chatham County make a difference in local government, and how do we begin to continue that work as we go forward?
Well, it's interesting to me in the fact that Chatham County has actually had a number of women serve as county commissioners actually in the last 30 years. And, and prior to that, I don't know all the history, but I do know that as the county moved into the 1990s, we had two very strong African-American women that served on the Chatham County Board of Commissioners, Yuva Holland and Margaret Pollard. And those who are in the Briar Chapel area know that you have a middle school, the Margaret Pollard Middle School. And we also had Betty Wilson and Mary Hayes Holmes, and then more recent, and Sally Coast, and then more recently, Sally, well, I mentioned Sally, Karen, and myself. And to me, it was interesting when I started looking back at the years these women served. We actually had 3 years where we had 3 women serving in the board of 5. And, you know, and I'm not sure if that was widespread throughout the rest of the state. My guess is probably not. So Chatham has been at the forefront. And Margaret Pollard was a personal friend of mine, and she was forward thinking. And I want to commend Margaret, who was Chatham County, and I'm not sure if she served as chair. I think she did for a year or so. But Margaret worked very closely with establishing, getting the GIS, Geographic Information Systems, operational in the county. And that is an enormous asset in county government, is to have this kind of technology available. So, we're Karen and I are serving because of their service. They charted the path. We also had our first woman manager, Renee, and she was chair for a few years, and retired to take care of family duties. That happens to females also all the time, and we know that being a woman in government, or being a woman in even the private sector, a lot of times when the family, the aging parent or parents have issues, that's who perhaps leaves their position in order to help and help out. So our tax administrators have been females. Our Register of Deeds have been women. And, we've had women, of course, serve in the, as you mentioned, Valerie Fouché right now is our state senator. And we've had women serve in the House of Representatives. So all of that is, I think, extremely important to our background and to how Chatham is going to move forward. Women in government service. And as you mentioned, government has gotten a bad rap. And the thing is, government has more to do with how we live our daily lives and what assets are available to us. And that is just overlooked a lot of times. There's a lot of bluster on the part of men, and but the women get things done. And I'll tell you, every time I see a committee, anytime I see a committee headed by females, I know the work is going to happen. I know it's going to be done. And I don't have necessarily that same feeling when it's a man, but that's perhaps my.
We want to make sure we give credit across the board here, but I'm gonna also acknowledge Cindy Perry. I was sitting here thinking, have we had a woman mayor of Pittsboro before you?
Yes, there were several actually. And I think the only post I can think of, as is on the chat, is that we've never had a woman district attorney. But if you go to the courthouse now, our clerk of court, our register of deeds, as Diana said, and very momentarily, we did have a female serving as sheriff, but that was as a result of the death of her husband. So, but I wanted to say about local government, yes, it is clear that that our local governments have the greatest impact on our daily lives. Recently, someone asked me what it was that I thought was my biggest accomplishment in my 4 years as mayor of Pittsboro. And one of the things I had to say was that I felt like that we had had a real change of tone in our government process. And I think women bring that oftentimes to the table. Certainly, we know the facts, we know the science, we know the history, we know the issues that we have before us. We do our homework, I know that. But we also bring a kinder and gentler tone, which I think, has brought a very special gift to Chatham County government. I know that certainly Betty Wilson and Margaret Pollard and Yuva Holland brought that tone to the county board. And I certainly know that Bet Wilson Foley, following in her mother's footsteps, and Pamela Baldwin have brought a distinctive female tone to the town board as well. So I just wanted to add that I think that's a very special gift that we can give to county government and town government.
And we have some great women serving in the Board of Education as well.
Oh, absolutely.
That's right. That's right.
Another
And
Wilson is there.
Yeah.
Ellen.
Yeah. In fact, that was exactly where I was going to ask you all for exactly those kinds of things right now, Ilana. You're right on top of the next question to the panel, because we are kind of at the place where we're thinking about the whole of the county and what are the things that make our kind of next steps of what Chatham's going to look like. We have open space, we have broadband, we have housing, the need for growing employment, education. We have all these things that we see in front of us. But just as you're saying, there are women in places right now, many of you on this board, in this panel right now, and on the boards that you began speaking to. And I think it's important that we also acknowledge and recognize that there are people who are in those trenches right now who are making headway. And I mentioned earlier the Chatham Health Alliance and Julie Wilkerson and some of the folks at the Chatham Health Department, Piedmont Health Services, the nonprofits. There are people out there who are really putting themselves and their communities first and making a difference. And I want you to call their names and tell us what they're doing. And I invite people in the chat to do the same. I did see Sheriff Mary Myrtle Seiler serving October to December of 1920. So I wanted to be sure I said that one out loud. But I would like to hear others.
So I'm happy to jump out there and start. I am going to call out the names of Ilana Dubester, Diana Hales, and Cindy Perry, because these are some of the women whose names I was hearing before I began to serve on a board, along with Del Turner. And then as I began to do some work around Chatham, I realized that there were a lot of men on a lot of boards, and a lot of them were doing good stuff, but the real work was being done by women. And my first introduction to Diana was that she took notes at every single Board of Commissioners meeting for years before running for office. So talk about understanding the issues and knowing what the challenges were and really having a depth of commitment that didn't require having the title of commissioner behind her name. And that is still true of her today, right? She doesn't have to be chair or vice chair to get the work done. I was hearing about Ilana Dubester in the time when she wasn't at the Hispanic Liaison, but about the work that she had done there. And that when the ship began to sail in a direction that wasn't great for the organization, she came back in. And, I'm sure at some level of expense to herself and to whatever other plans she may have had, her commitment to that work was evident in the way she proceeded to come back and do the things that she does and the bravery with which they do this work, right? So Ilana is clearly afraid of nobody. And that is shown in her passion and the way she approaches her work. Diana is shockingly untimid. And when people ask me on the board, who do you go to for such and such a thing? I always say, well, go to the bravest person on the board, Diana. And I think that has been true of these women that are getting things done. And there's a 4-letter word that I could throw in there, but we get stuff done. The same of Del Turner. At any point in time, you reach out to Del and she is working on something meaningful. Right now, she is trying to address the question of how social studies is taught in our schools, and that it has been all of our social studies curriculum, and probably across this country, has been from the perspective of a cisgender, white, Western European male. and that cannot be the way to look at the entirety of our social history and our communities. And so her work around that will make a difference for all of us. And so I think if you look into the corners of Chatham County, you will find women holding up those pillars, those 4 pillars. I think of Genevieve Meganson, who, does work that kind of flies under the radar if you don't have young kids or if you're not connected in schools. But the work that she does with families and parents of young children, of that preschool population, those early learners, is critical. It's absolutely critical. It's critical to the parents and their ability to reintegrate if they've had to take time off from work, but to be able to continue careers and to have children in supportive, healthy, positive, good early education environments that then feed into the next thing that these children are going to do. It is critical. And she doesn't, get heralded or sung from any mountaintops, and she doesn't have a grand title behind her name. But her work really, that kind of work is the foundation of a good, strong, healthy community. So there are all these women that I'm so deeply grateful for their participation in these many spaces. I think of past EDC directors. I think of teachers and superintendents and principals. I think of my own autistic son's teachers who, when I said Chatham County schools couldn't teach him, they kept saying, just give us a chance. Give us a chance. And yes, he does belong here. And that kind of deep commitment to the work that they are doing, and an understanding that that they have something to offer, and their offering of their expertise, and often without the kind of remuneration that it deserves, and certainly without the kind of titles. So they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And I'm so proud to be able to call so many of them friend.
That's lovely, lovely testament, Karen. And I want to just read what Carolyn Miller wrote in the chat, saying Margaret Pollard once told me that when she was a commissioner, her first thought when she woke up every morning was, how can I serve the people of Chatham County today? A true public servant. And I think you're, calling out others who might not have been seen. Ilana, I am guessing you have some folks you'd like to have us hear about as well.
Well, Karen hit on some of those, and I appreciate that. I actually wanted to bring into the room some of our up and coming women leaders in Chatham County, some of the younger generation. And so 3 of them in county government, which are Stephanie Watkins, Hillary Poland, who has done such amazing work with all of us in nonprofit, and Stephanie in housing issues and many more, and Courtney Cooper-Luter, who led the way for the census in Chatham County, among many other amazing things that she does. And Sherry Murrell, for sure. Another one up and coming is Victoria Johnson of the Chatham News, who is leading the La Voz de Chatham, a whole new focus of the Chatham News and Record on the Hispanic Latinx community. We've probably had, I know we've had more coverage in that newspaper in the 6 months she's been there than the 26 years of the Hispanic liaison. And a sea change in terms of coverage about the issues in our community. And she's doing such a great job, and the team that is working on La Voz. And an in-house shout out to a beloved Selena Lopez and her leadership with youth. And I'm really keeping my fingers crossed she's going to move to Chatham and run for Board of Education, which is one of the things she wants to do. So please support her in that. And then a couple other women that I also want to mention is Kim Karaganis, who recently retired, and incredible leadership for our youth in Chatham County, and Vicki Newell of Chatham Literacy, who does tremendous work, and their beautiful work in getting immigrants to become citizens. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Diana, yeah, good, please.
One thing, and thanks for all the great words, Karen and Ilana, because also you touched on our nonprofit community. Our nonprofit community here in Chatham is very much led by women, and and not only in the human services arena, but Elaine Chioso, the Haw River Assembly. If you want to see an effective environmental organization, the Haw River Assembly is just astonishing. And this is a testament to Elaine's leadership, and now Emily Sutton, who has followed her in the director's role. And, and I would be remiss without even mentioning Vicki Newland from the Chatham Literacy. Part of the problem, it's like housing is not just new housing. Housing is also, how do you fix dilapidated housing and bring it up to standards so people will have a safe and healthy environment, because your housing has everything to do with whether or not your children have asthma. It's related to your housing. And it's the same with education. It's not only education in schools and continuing education through the community college. And by the way, Chatham County government, your tax dollars are supporting the Promise program to provide 2 years free, that is free, community college for Chatham High School graduates, whether they're the charter school or public school. But that's where literacy comes into, because an educated population needs to be able to read and write. And I have very strong feeling for Chatham Literacy, for the work they are doing, because they bridge both worlds, the new immigrant and the people that had to go on and work and never got their full education. So these are women, and these are women in charge, and I celebrate them, and part of Women's History Month.
That was great, Diana. Cindy, I wonder if you want to also put some of your plugs in there as you hear this wonderful legacy that folks who've made a difference. I'm sure a few others have come to mind for you.
Well, yes. Former women mayors of Pittsboro include Mary. Now that I'm pressed, I'm probably not going to be able to come up with, she was a beautician in town. And
oh, I remember.
Yeah. And then there was, okay. Well,
I'll tell you someone else while you're thinking for just a second. Elsie Cunningham came up for me as another person who made a huge contribution for seniors, and really a lot of folks I think didn't really know how much Elsie had done, and the Chatham County Council on Aging, Kathy Wasco, some of the folks who really have made a huge contribution for making this a place people want to retire.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Elsie Cunningham and Cassie Wasco certainly are but in a broader sense, women have taken leadership positions, not only in government, but also, and not only in the nonprofits, but in the careers. Currently, we have a woman here in Pittsboro, Becky Smith, who is an engineer, and she's worked diligently with the town of Pittsboro. She knows so much about the utilities work in Pittsboro that it's just absolutely amazing. Years ago, you wouldn't have found a woman in the engineering arena. And it's people like that are expanding men's view, other people's view of how we are competent and how we are ready to take on control. I must say that one of the things I thought about too was how sometimes those stereotypes still pull us back. I had to go to Durham one time to meet with a police officer in the middle of the night because my car had been stolen, and so Dan and I went to some dark street in Durham and found my car, which had been secured by the Durham Police Department. And the deputy came up to Dan and reached out his hand and said, "Hi, I understand you're the mayor of Pittsboro." So, you know, so we've still got a ways to go. In the law office, Karen, sometimes I was mistaken for the secretary, but we've got a huge amount to do. But certainly, one of the things that was mentioned earlier was daycare, and I know that the study that was done by the participants on the status of women here in Chatham County highlighted the idea that we really have some tremendous gaps in providing appropriate and appropriately priced daycare. I mean, it's crucial. Post-COVID, it's going to be exceedingly important for women to get back into the workplace and back into the community. And I'm hoping that that's one area that we can find some funds to expand.
And we should all be fighting for a minimum wage, for a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Yeah, living wages, and making sure that, we're talking about the cost of housing, and can you afford a house if you are not able to earn a wage that meets that, standard for the community. I think it is really, again, these are women's and human issues. I want to call out again what people are speaking to in the chat, because I think there are a few other sectors we've not spoken to quite as much, and one is agriculture. And I want to just say the names of Esther Cohen and Meredith Light and Kristen Bulfrit, who are all women who are making agricultural contributions in Chatham County. I also have been thinking about the arts, and many of you are surely familiar with people who have made a tremendous contribution as artists in Chatham County, the Arts Council and the Artists Guild, both, again, with strong women leadership, men too, but very much at the forefront of making sure that the things get done, have been really fabulous women. And I am excited about the numbers of folks who are adding. So Chantel Johnson, another farmer in the group, so great. So I want to close out by giving a great deal of thanks to the panelists who agreed to be a part of this program. Commissioner Hales and Howard, thank you both so much for all the work that you do and being a part of this event. Ilana, Dubester, as someone who I think we came to the county at almost the same time. We were both very, very new to the county at the same time, and just having a chance to see all that you've accomplished and the ways in which you've made not only Chatham County but North Carolina a better place, and for so many people. Cindy Perry's leadership as a person who's helped in nonprofit, public, private, every kind of sector there is out there. I think you've touched it in one way or another. And in our collective community, we all have the benefit of a great library system. And so I want to thank Rita and Yvette, Evie, as you have made it possible to gather us here together, to give us a chance to be celebratory on Women's History Month. Thank you so much for convening this kind of forum. I've seen so many people say, is this going to happen again? Are we going to do this? And that I think is a great way to celebrate what you all have done by pulling this together. So thank you so much for making it something that people would like to see happen again. I appreciate being a part of it.